like to welcome all of you here to New England Council Congressional Roundtable Breakfast. Let me start by thanking the sponsor of this morning's breakfast is BAE Systems, and in particular, although unexpected travel kept him from being here today. Many of you know Tom Bishop. He's been a very engaged member of the New England Council for many years. And needless to say, BAE Systems is a tremendous corporate citizen here in New Hampshire. So we're very grateful to their ongoing support of the New England Council, and also Tom's great support of the Council as well. Before I have the pleasure of introducing our guest here this morning, let me quickly tell you about a few upcoming events that the New England Council will be hosting. This past year, I think we did almost 76 events throughout all of New England and in Washington, and we're, again, hit the ground running early on, and we've had a few events already this year, and we continue to post additional events in the next couple of weeks. On Monday, February 10th, we'll host Congressman Stephen Lynch at a Congressional Roundtable Breakfast. We return to this wonderful state on February 21st to hear from the other half of the New Hampshire House delegation, and that is Chris Pappas. The event will be held right down the street at the BVI. We'll close the month of February back in Boston on the 25th, where Congressman Joe Kennedy will be our guest speaker at the Seaport Hotel. And I hope that many of you will mark in your calendar our annual Washington Leaders Conference, which will be held on May 13th and 14th. We look forward to two very busy and very productive days in Washington. Anyone who has attended in the past will really agree that it's just a wonderful, wonderful 2 days of experience of meeting policymakers from the executive branch, from the United States Congress, the United States Senate, people from the media. All in all, it's just a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to hear exactly what is going on in Washington. Today, we're thrilled to welcome back an incredible advocate for our region and a great friend to the New England Council, and that's Congresswoman Annie Kuster. Many of you know that she's serving her fourth term, representing the 2nd Congressional District, and many of her constituents are here today. During that time, she has proven to be the consummate public official, and she's accessible. She's someone who will take the time to listen to the ideas and the concerns of others. She's emerged as a leader and an influential voice on the most important issues facing our state, our region, and our nation. The Congresswoman serves on the House Committee on Energy and Commerce, a committee with jurisdictions over issues of critical importance to New England, ranging from health care to energy to climate change to interstate and foreign commerce. In fact, this committee, I believe, is the oldest continuous standing committee in the House of Representatives, dating back to 1795. Although the Congress and the nation as a whole are transfixed by the impeachment proceedings in Washington, our Congresswoman has kept her eye on the ball, and just this past Monday, she unveiled her clean energy agenda, prioritizing the need to build a clean, energy-efficient economy to improve public health, increase the number of green jobs, and protect the environment here in the Granite State. And earlier this month, Congressman Kuster joined the rest of the New Hampshire delegation calling for a continuation in the opioid response funding for those states hit the hardest by the opioid epidemic, including here in New Hampshire with one of the highest overdose rates in the nation. Even in these hyper-partisan times, the Congresswoman has proven a commitment to working across the aisle as a founding member of the United Solutions Caucus, and most recently demonstrated through her support of the bipartisan USMCA trade deal earlier this month. And I know the Consul General is here from Canada, and that bill would not have been possible for that signing at the White House without the support of Annie Kuster and Richie Neal, Chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. When the bill came to the House over a year ago, the Speaker indicated the bill, as written from the White House, would not pass and it would not have bipartisan support. Speaker Pelosi designated a team of legislators to work with their colleagues to see we can improve the bill on the environmental and labor and pharmaceutical pricing language. They did. They worked long and hard, but they put together a bill that had over 400 votes, bipartisan. It didn't happen by accident, but it happened with the leadership of people like Annie Kuster. So needless to say, New Englanders are truly fortunate to have such an advocate on Capitol Hill, and boy, are we fortunate to have the opportunity to hear from her this morning. Please join me in welcoming the Honorable United States Representative Annie Kuster.
Wow, Jim, make my day. That was very generous. I appreciate it. Thank you. I was thinking that it is somewhat auspicious to be speaking to all of you today, but I'm glad Jim set the stage, which is that I'm going to talk about what we are actually getting done, and then you all can watch your phones as to the future of our democracy. So it's obviously great to be with you. Thank you, Jim Brett, Larry Zabar. I love the New England Council. I have from the beginning of time. Tom Horgan and I and my clients, we used to come to all your events. And the part that you may not appreciate is that we do these breakfasts in Washington all the time as well. And I think it genuinely keeps the business community and the members of the New England delegation much closer. When I came in, Richie Neal is our dean of the delegation, and we meet on a regular basis, and more so now. And the New England Council really keeps us focused on the important issues of the day, the USMCA. I want to thank our Canadian Council for being with us. David, thank you. And I'm actually going to start there as I dive into bipartisan progress that we have made this year since I've seen you last. So the way I went about this, many people in the room, Lou D'Alessandro is first and foremost a member of our New England Canada Business Council. And actually, a staff member of mine, Brian Brezhnehan, my North Country office in Littleton, is very involved in that. And thank you, Lou, for all the work that you're doing. So I was able to join the New England Canada Business Council, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and regional trade officials and experts in Hanover. Some of you in the room were there with us to discuss this United States-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. And Jim did a great job laying it out. When it first came to the House, we had some serious concerns about it. The environmental provisions, the labor provisions. There was a provision on pharmaceuticals that had some real resistance in my caucus. And just a minor digression here about watching leadership styles. And Nancy Pelosi, you can tell she's a mother and a grandmother, if you know what I mean. She knows how to bring people together to get things done, including toddlers and teenagers. And so what she did in our caucus, she had 4 issues that we knew we had to do some work on, delve into, as you say, go deep. But the way she did it, she created these sort of mini task forces with 2 people, so 8 people from my caucus were involved. And she would pick the farthest left progressive liberal and the farthest right pro-business. I'm a vice chair of what's called the New Democrats, and that's the business-oriented, jobs, opportunity-oriented. So the one that was really funny was Rosa DeLauro from Connecticut and Terry Sewell, my colleague from Selma. And we all sat back and watched this happen because if Rosa and Terry get to yes, then the rest of us are good. And so that happened. Stevie Lynch was involved. There were a whole group of people. So sure enough, over the course of a year, hammering it out, and we would see them going after each other. But it really worked, and we improved, and I was happy this morning, David told me that Canada agrees that the improvements were important and that the agreement that was signed this week by the president is stronger and better for everyone involved. So obviously, cross-border trade is a very big deal for New Hampshire businesses. worth over 5 billion, billion with a B. We have to keep track of our M's and our B's and our T's in Washington, but $5 billion worth of made in New Hampshire goods just last year crossing the border. So I was certainly glad to see us get to yes and get it over the finish line. And so in the end, the agreement included provisions to enforce Mexico's labor reforms. That was a big part of it. Richie went down to Mexico and had a real, come to Jesus moment with them down there to safeguard our American jobs, more robust rules and accountability mechanisms on protecting natural resources. That obviously was important to us here in New Hampshire. And then one that's near and dear to my heart, improved access to Canadian markets for our New Hampshire dairy farmers and dairy farmers across the country. We blocked language that would have raised prescription drug costs, and we secured key enforcement provisions to protect American jobs and improve accountability. And so I was excited about that. Obviously, we still have work to do on the environmental front, and we will on climate change and reducing carbon pollution. And I'll get to that as well. But it was a good agreement, and I think most importantly, when you said over 400 votes, it's important for the American people to understand today of all days, as divided as we are, that signing ceremony was literally this week, that we got to a vote. Now, the fact that none of the Democrats were invited to it, that's another thing. But, we're getting the work done, and we're doing it in a bipartisan way. I want to switch to healthcare because obviously that's often first and foremost in the minds of our constituents, and I'm sure your employees and your HR, your folks that are keeping track of this. I see some friends from Rath and Young here. When I often tell this story, when I started out as a young lawyer, we had health insurance for everybody, for the lawyer, the secretary, the full family. I remember one of the secretaries had 4 or 5 kids. I don't know how she managed her life, but health insurance all around. And then as I got to the partnership table and started to hear year after year, oh, it's only going up 9%, oh, whoops, 12%, oh, 13%, oh, we got it down to 8%. And this was year after year after year. And honestly, Maria, I don't know, but by the time I left, it was like, okay, we can cover you and you can buy the rest for your family. Like, it's just hard to figure out. And so what that's done in the rest of the economy, and many of you in the room probably have felt this, in manufacturing, in retail, the squeeze on wages, you just can't make it up in wages. And I think that's a huge part of the imbalance in our economy right now. And frankly, I think that's a big part of what's going on as we go into the New Hampshire primary. The Iowa caucus is Monday night, our primary a week later. And I think that's probably where the Trump presidency came from, is just people are pent up in not seeing the growth in wages to keep up. Everybody wants a better life for the next generation, and many of us in the room benefited from that. My family worked hard, and my husband Brad and I have had a better life, and our kids hopefully will have the same. But for many, many families, that's not happened. There's uncertainty. People feel as though, wow, I grew up in a bigger house than I can afford now, or I grew up in a house that my parents owned and now we're renting, and there are increased costs throughout the system too. But in any event, back to healthcare, what I want to stay focused on in the short term is improving the Affordable Care Act to make sure that we at least can get affordable, high-quality healthcare to every American. And the place that we started was on the pre-existing conditions, because that was such a big part of what the Affordable Care Act was all about. It's hard for many of us to remember. I won't ask you to raise hands, but if I did, virtually everyone in this room, myself included, would have something that we have in our bodies, in our makeup, that previously you might not have been able to get health insurance. You might have been stuck in a job because you didn't dare switch, because you'd had a cancer that was in recovery, you'd had a, anyway, the list goes on and on. What was happening in this administration is that they were diminishing the benefit of that pre-existing condition protection that we were all taking for granted. And the way they did it is what we call junk health plans. This is a great Washington oxymoron. They were called short-term limited duration health plans. I'm pretty sure that's saying the same thing twice. And what it was, they were 3 months long, and they were intended for people that were in between jobs or switching jobs or coming out of school. And those limited duration plans didn't have all the protections built in. The administration stretched them to 12 months and then let you renew them 4 times. So they go from 3 months to 4 years. And suddenly people are getting into these products that they didn't realize didn't cover pre-existing conditions. I now serve on the House Energy and Commerce Committee on the Health Subcommittee, and the hearing on this was just heartbreaking. People that had bills in the hundreds of thousands of dollars for something that they said, but it was a pre-existing condition, and the insurance company was saying, well, we don't cover that. And then worse yet, there was even a case where they said, but I didn't know I had that, and the insurance company said, but you should have known. So we were, I carried the bill to cut back on that, called the Protecting Americans with Pre-Existing Conditions, and we were able to get that passed in the House, and one of the themes is that we have 400 bills that we've passed in the House. 275 of those are bipartisan bills, and they're sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk. So if you know him, please ask him to, when they finish up this week or next, if they could move on with that. But that's one of the bills. Last month, I was delighted to see passage of H.R. 3. That's the Elijah Cummings Lower Drug Costs Now Act. And drug costs are right at the top of my constituents' concerns. For the people who do have health insurance, they are still concerned about the fact that they go to get their medication. Maybe their premium, maybe their copay is $5, $10, but often they'll show up and it'll be $200 or $900, and they don't know what's going to happen. So those hearings were very, very interesting. You know, you give ingenious American innovators 20 years, they will come up with a way to get around every rule we make. So this is in the generic space. I don't know if we have any pharmaceutical companies here. I don't mean to malign anyone in particular, but just the testimony that we heard. So the generic system actually works remarkably well. And you might not know that 90% of prescriptions are now generic prescriptions. And so that competition brings down the cost to everyone, for the individual, for the insurance company, for the employer. But there are drugs that when a company realizes that it's about to get to the end of the patent, and they see another company doing the research to come into the market to compete, they would just buy the company and keep it from going in getting into competition. Another trick they did is they would, they're getting to the end of the time frame for their exclusivity, and they would change one molecule and go back and start from the beginning and try to get another 10 or 20 years. Or they would change the purpose of the drug and try to go back and get. So that's a part of what that bill does. That lower drug costs now is actually a bipartisan effort, and we're hoping that we will move that as well. And that's an area, there's several areas that the White House does indicate that they want to move forward on in a bipartisan way, and that's where I tend to stay focused. Let's try to get this actually done. So prescription drugs is definitely part of it. And it's been fascinating for me. I've had a chance just going all over my district on a healthcare listening tour, talking to people about their concerns and about this legislation. But just to give you a sense of what people are out there dealing with, we were in a town hall down in Pelham, and a constituent named Kathy facing $800 monthly premiums and a $6,000 deductible. That's not really affordable health care. Like, you're not really getting what you need. You need prevention, you need, you want to stay healthy. You don't just want to have health care when you're in a catastrophic situation. In that case, she was paying that for herself and for her disabled daughter. She was a lovely woman. She said to me, "I'm not wealthy." And I'm thinking, yeah, that's a lot of money, $1,600 off the top going out every month, and yet you've got essentially $12,000 in the deductible before you're going to get any relief. So that's what we're working on, and I should say, when it comes to healthcare, just in terms of the national debate, I like to say I'm pro-choice. I believe in the consumer being able to make the decision, not the government kicking people off their health care. So there's a lot of discussion in our party about Medicare for all. I believe in Medicare for those who want it. And I do think that was in the original Affordable Care Act, this option, public option. I do think it will work in the sense that people like Kathy, who, given her situation, I think she was self-employed or very small business. She didn't have the benefit of a big company like some of you. But I think those people having the option to pay a premium to get into Medicare would do two things. One, fewer people would be in that situation with such a high deductible that they can't really get care. And the people I talk to in Medicare are happy with it. They like it. But the other thing I think it would do, again, going back to competition, I think it would cause the insurance companies to sort of sit up and take notice as they were starting to lose consumers into that option, and that it might create competition to bring down premiums and increase quality and access. So, and if the people in my party that believe in the Medicare for all are correct, over a few years, more and more of us will be in that. But where I differ with them is that 70% of the American people get their health insurance through their employer, and at least some of them are satisfied. And I don't really want the government to come in and kick everybody off of that. I think it's just too much uncertainty. So more good news on the healthcare front. We, in December, as we were closing the budget negotiations, we were able to permanently repeal the health insurance tax, the medical device tax, and the Cadillac tax. So I know some of you were involved and reached out to us on that. Let me switch over to PFAS. We've had some very good progress on some issues that are very near and dear to us here in New Hampshire. And I want to give a shout out to my colleague Chris Pappas for diving right in on this issue. And obviously Jean Shaheen and Maggie Hassan are very involved. So PFAS chemicals, these are these forever chemicals. They do not disappear. They do not go away. They will be in our water, in our air, in the soil for a lifetime. And what we found, New Hampshire is sort of ground zero, partly because we have great advocates that have brought this issue forward. My colleagues don't realize that they have this problem. It's very similar to the opioid issue when I first started 8 years ago, and I would say to my colleagues, do you have heroin in your district? And they'd say, no, we don't have that. And I'd say, oh, well, it's coming. And now we have 105 members of our bipartisan opioid task force. PFAS is very similar. I say, do you have PFAS in your district? And they say, no, I've never heard of it. But I've seen the map. It's in every district in the country, essentially, because like Pease Air Force Base, any military facility that used this foam for firefighting, it's used to suppress diesel fires, is one of the rings. And then the other ways it's used in my district is in the manufacturing of pots and pans with Teflon, that type of fabric. So anyway, what we have seen here in New Hampshire is pediatric cancer clusters, negative health impacts, low birth weights, decreased fertility. So obviously, this is something we've got to take very seriously. And so Chris and I have been involved. We both have had bills that have passed through committee and gone to the floor, and earlier this month, the House passed my legislation that is preventing new PFAS chemicals from being approved by the EPA. I think enough is enough. We're going to have a hard enough time cleaning up what we have, and that we shouldn't continue to make these contaminants. Chris's bill has to do with helping the municipalities to deal with the cost of the cleanup, because once it's in the water, it goes from the smokestack in a cloud over the land, it gets in the land, it gets in the water, so it's very, very difficult. We have, in my district in Litchfield and in his district in Merrimack and then over in the Seacoast, whole communities that can't drink the water and had to, Manchester luckily was able to tap in and bring in their city water, but you know, it's a big issue and we're on it. The other one that I've talked to you every single time we've gotten together is opioids, and I'm really proud of the leadership of our delegation on this issue, and what I want to say is that New Hampshire, having been hit so hard, is also home to some of the most innovative solutions to help us contend with this issue. And so our task force that I actually started with Frank Ginta, it's still going very strong. I work now with a colleague named Brian Fitzpatrick from Pennsylvania as my co-chair. We meet on a monthly basis. We've been very successful in legislation and in funding. And just to bring you up to date, we were able to secure $5 billion funding in the FY20 federal spending bill signed in December, including investments to implement the Support Act and $1.5 billion in flexible funding for state opioid response grants. And then part of that HR 3 prescription drug bill that we sent to the Senate, that has another $10 billion in opioids. I'm like a bad penny. And any discussion about money, I'm just right there trying to get more opioid funding. Because it's a big problem, it's a complex problem. You have to attack education and prevention, increase access to treatment, and then recognize long-term recovery. Any of you and your families that have dealt with addiction, and whether it's alcohol or opioids, it's not a one and done type of thing. It's not a 28 days and we're past it. It's a lifelong issue, and we need supports, we need recovery housing, and we need to help people to get better. So two things I want to mention. One just happened on, what day are we on now? Friday. On Wednesday, we averted a disaster, which is fentanyl. So most of the deaths, 82% of the deaths right now in New Hampshire are from this drug called fentanyl. And fentanyl is evil. If you ask a doctor, fentanyl is great. They use it for surgery. It's magical. But if you ask anybody in law enforcement or anybody with a family trying to cope with this, it's evil. It's fatal. And it is 100 times stronger than, 50 times stronger than heroin, 100 times stronger than morphine. And literally a grain of salt can kill you in this fentanyl. Now, what it means is that for drug dealers, it's magical because they don't get caught because it's these small quantities, but they make a lot of money. In my testimony the other day on the floor, I was saying they buy the precursor chemicals from China, and they literally get delivered in the US mail, and we can't, we're overwhelmed to try to stop that. because they're so small and there's so much mail pouring in that it's almost impossible. But for $3,000 to $5,000 to buy the precursors, you can make $1.5 million, and it's enough fentanyl to kill 500,000 Americans by overdose. So this is evil. And what happened 2 years ago, the DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency, came into our task force for a hearing, and I remember, I was sitting next to Brian Fitzpatrick. I remember sitting there. He used to work, I think for the FBI, so he knows law enforcement. And they gave this presentation, I will never forget the expression, criminal chemists in China were making this stuff. And he said they stay one molecule ahead of the DEA, because what was happening back then is you schedule a substance, heroin, morphine, and by being on this schedule, the top tier, number one, then there are certain rules about how it's handled in the medical community for legitimate use, and then how it's handled by law enforcement for illegitimate, illicit use. And it has certain connotations, one of which is called mandatory minimum guidelines for sentencing. So they're talking about these criminal chemists, and they would stay one molecule ahead of the DEA. The DEA would be trying to get these things scheduled, but they would just change it a little bit. I heard on Wednesday that they have up to 3,000 different fentanyl analogs that would be possible. So what they did at the time, it turns out they had the authority for a new rule that was temporary. So for the last 2 years, there's been a rule in place that all fentanyl and fentanyl analogs would be Schedule 1, and they wouldn't have to keep coming back and saying this one and this one and this one. And as a result of that rule, they dramatically dropped the types of fentanyl that were in the market, and they increased their apprehensions, and they increased their convictions, and they had the tools they needed. And so at the beginning of the week, I took a call from, some of you may know him, John Delana. He's an amazing man at the DEA here in New Hampshire. And he said, we have a situation. This rule is coming to, it's going to expire February 6th. And the Senate has worked out a bill. We need to get that passed in the House. So then my committee chair asked me to manage this bill on the floor, and I said, sure, happy to do it. And then it turned into this big fight within my caucus with people who do not like the mandatory minimums. And I said, I'm not fond of them either, but my people are dying. Can we get this done first, and then I'm happy to work with you. So that's what we did, and we passed it. Speaking of bipartisan, 320 to 88. And so that will give us another 15 months of the scheduling, and then that'll give us time to sort out this other issue. But it just gives you a sense of really what they're up against, how complex this is, and how we all have to work together. And it felt good to have the wherewithal within our caucus to be able to do that and have people recognize that, you know, they trust me on this issue, and they knew that we had to get this done. All right, well, let me move right along to the end here. The big news on Monday, also this week, we have rolled out this clean energy agenda. If anybody wants copies, we're happy to give it to you. We got it all like done up slick. It's 25 bills that are bipartisan bills. So for my agenda, I wanted to make sure that these are bills that we can actually get done. Half of them are in our Energy and Commerce Committee, and we're starting hearings. I'm on the Energy Subcommittee with Joe Kennedy from Massachusetts, Peter Welch from Vermont, so New England is well represented. And their energy efficiency, clean energy standards, we have electric vehicles, it's all aspects of getting to a cleaner, safer planet and limiting carbon pollution. And then the other half of the bills will be in Chris Pappas's committee, Transportation and Infrastructure. Our colleague Peter DeFazio, the chair of that committee, just rolled out a major new infrastructure bill. And so I'm excited about this winter and spring, and hopefully we will have these bills coming to the floor by the spring. And if we can get the attention of the Senate, we'll try to move some of them through. They are bipartisan, and if we can't, these will be head at the top of the agenda in January. So that's where I am. My team is here, Nick Brown, my district director, Amy Slattery, Tom in our Nashua office, and we want to make sure to stay in touch with all of you. If you know anybody that needs any help on anything, we had over 800 people that we were able to help with federal agencies this year. We get on average 2,000 emails and letters a week, and we take pride in responding to everyone. If you're trying to reach me directly, I'll give you my personal email because I don't want you to get lost in the 2,000. But things are going great. I have an amazing team, and happy to take questions, and I hope I didn't go on too long.
We have time for a couple of questions. Maybe I'll just start the first one. You touched on...
And we can talk politics, too.
Okay. You touched on earlier this week, the Energy Committee, Transportation Committee, Ways and Means Committee released a major, massive infrastructure bill, $760 billion for the next 5 years.
Yeah.
It just seems to have been so much talk about infrastructure, but very little action.
Yeah.
It starts back to May of 2019. The president met with people in the leadership and said, hey, let's do $2 trillion in infrastructure. And then it died. Senate takes up a smaller version, $280 billion infrastructure, but Senator Grassley says even though it passed the committee, we're not really going to address it. So how realistic is it this session that people will really work together? I noticed there's no funding in there, and purposely no funding, but how realistic?
We're definitely talking about the funding, and Peter DeFazio keeps joking with Richie Neal. It's like his committee is going to do all the spending, and then they'll send it over to Richie and Ways and Means and figure out about the funding. But we're definitely talking about, you know, is it going to be surface transportation fees? Is it going to be, we have to get creative because the vehicle miles traveled are dropping. And so the gas tax is not going to give us the same revenue, particularly with the hybrids and, you know, going the direction that we want to go with electric vehicles and reducing carbon pollution. So that's where people are starting to, you know, kind of delve in with creative solutions on that. But I think, I mean, look, from our perspective, the House is going to move these bills. I mean, infrastructure is, you know, we have this for the people agenda. Healthcare and lowering the cost of prescription drugs was number one. Number two was infrastructure and creating jobs all across the country and our crumbling roads and bridges and highways, but also airports and ports. And most importantly for me here, broadband communication in rural communities. I serve on a broadband task force. So I think we will move all these bills to the point where they would be ready to go to the Senate. If we get crickets from the Senate, then that's where we'll start in January when we control the House, the Senate, and the White House.
Okay. And you mentioned the economy. I think we ended the year with a 2.2% growth in the economy, a little less than what the president thought it would happen. But what was alarming was that we brought in $3.6 trillion in revenue, but we spent $4.6, which means we ended the year with $1 trillion.
$1 trillion deficit.
And they say, the CBO, Congressional Budget Office, says that is going to be the patent for several years
Yeah,
on the out.
yeah.
Any thoughts about how to rein that in?
Well, I think we got to talk to the president and his party, because I'm very concerned about it. And this is one of the priorities of the New Democrats, is that everything should be paid for, and we should be cutting wherever we can. And that's one of the reasons, frankly, I think there's more interest in that in our caucus than, it used to be the other way around. You know, I mean, we all come from frugal New Hampshire, and it was the Republican Party that was talking about that. But one thing I didn't mention, yesterday we took House votes on the AUMF, the Authorization of Military Force, and I think there are people in our party who don't want us to get into another expensive conflict in the Middle East. I think we're very concerned about it, but we're really not hearing, in fact, to the contrary, you're hearing now from economists saying, oh, don't worry about $1 trillion in debt, that's all good, and, you know, I look at the president and the way he ran his businesses, it makes me nervous. I personally think it's a problem, and I think we should be addressing it.
And then one other question is that the Chair of Appropriations Committee
Yes.
just met with some of the freshman Democratic members that won in competitive districts, Trump districts, and she met with them to talk about earmarks, whether you'd be supportive of earmarks. And
We don't use that word.
we use is community funding projects.
Community funding projects, thank you, thank you.
Do you ever think that, I know the Republicans repealed the earmarks in 2011, Speaker Boehner. Do you think we'll ever see the earmarks come back under a different term?
Yeah, there's a
transparency?
great deal of conversation in our caucus about how to create a system that would address the needs of member districts. I'd say it that way. For myself, I haven't really been a part of that conversation because we've had great success getting funding back to New Hampshire, and please talk to us about projects you have. The biggest one that didn't get a whole lot of notice, we got $200 million to the Department of Transportation to finish off I-93 and to, I think they fixed up some 20-some-odd red-listed bridges and 10,000 miles of pavement. So that was sort of a unique situation that we had worked hard on and got that done. But on the other side, we've had tremendous success. Big parts of my district are rural, and so this has not been quite for Nashua or Concord, but pretty much everywhere else. Programs like the U.S. Department of Agriculture Rural Development that's funding for a wide range of projects. We've done all kinds of projects from water pollution control and water systems to a new health facility, brand new health facility, $1 million in Bristol, New Hampshire. They'd never had a doctor, they'd never had a dentist in that town. You always had to go to Laconia or Lebanon. We've got a new mental health and substance use treatment up in Bethlehem, New Hampshire. The North Country had no substance use treatment north of probably Laconia. We've got a new, brand new, beautiful facility in West Plymouth for homeless veteran housing. So we've found lots of success, and in fact, for me, the problem with earmarks is that the member has to pick, because you only get 3, right? Isn't that the way it works? Yeah. I don't want to be the one to pick. I want to support all your good ideas, and we'll write a letter for any good idea you have, and then, you know, hopefully you'll get the funding. So that's my thing. But I know a lot of my colleagues want to bring it back.
And then you had mentioned earlier that you talk politics. Your assessment of how it is going here in New Hampshire, and who should we be watching? I
think it's wide open. I keep telling my colleagues, ask me every single week, I come, what's going to happen? Look, I mean, Lou's been at this. My first one when I was 16 years old. You've been at this for a while. I've never seen it so fluid. I think it's about 52%. Maybe it's going down day by day. There was a funny article in Politico last week. If you know the expression FOMO, is fear of missing out, And this guy, the guy who came up with that expression has a new expression, FOBO, fear of a better option. And it freezes you. It's like if you're trying to watch a movie on Netflix and you have 300 movies to pick from, you can't find a movie. My husband and I, we went through a book of 15,000 names for our second child, and we couldn't agree on one. And we let the first child, Zach, name the second child, Travis. It's all worked out. But I mean, when you have too many choices, you just can't. And I think for us in our party, we feel as though the weight of the world, I've never felt the responsibility of this in the same way. Usually it's kind of fun. We pick somebody, they go on or they don't, and so that's what I've seen. If I had to guess, I think it will depend on Iowa to a certain extent. And what I mean by that is narrowing the field. The most likely is if Amy Klobuchar or any of the others don't make this 15% threshold. I hadn't been aware of this rule, but in the Iowa caucuses, you walk into a room like this and you go to your corners and do the first round. And if a candidate doesn't get 15% of the people in the room, then those people have to go to other candidates. So that could happen. And if that happened, then you're down to presumably the four, Bernie, Biden, Warren, and Buttigieg. Of those four, I think honestly anything could happen. I think that could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 3, 2, 1. The polling shows Bernie ahead, but I believe what that is that he has the most adamant support. But Kathy Sullivan made an interesting point. He won the New Hampshire primary 4 years ago with 60% of the vote, and now he's down somewhere 25 to 28 down there. So the ones he has left, they're going to answer the pollster, absolutely, I'm with him. And they're not going to have any. The rest of us are so wishy-washy. They're going to answer the pollster one day, Buttigieg, the next day Klobuchar, the day after that, people are still talking about Michael Bennett. It's just like we're all over the place. So I believe that Elizabeth Warren and Pete Buttigieg have probably the best ground game. There was a very interesting article about the vice president and what is going on with his campaign here in New Hampshire. He has a lot of loyal supporters, obviously a lot of prominent endorsements, but I don't know that he has kind of the energy and enthusiasm going on. So I think it could be anywhere. I think it'll be really fun. I hope you enjoy it. Don't forget to get out and vote. We need you. Maybe the people in this room will decide.
You endorsed?
I have. I endorsed Pete Buttigieg.
Okay.
Yeah, I think he's great. I'm looking to the future.
Catherine Sullivan endorsed Elizabeth Warren.
Elizabeth Warren. Yep. I think, Lou, are you with Vice President? Yep. Yeah. And Billy Shaheen endorsed the Vice President. Yeah. No, I've never seen it this way. So good to see you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Jim. Great to see you. Yeah.